All right. So thank you for the opportunity. Today I will talk about one of the topics that were the most interesting in the past 10 years. I mean, one of them.
Só porque eu perdi a apresentação aqui.
Oh,
Só apresentando rapidamente, Bruno Domingues.
I'm Bruno Domingues. I'm head of financial services at Intel. I'm based in the United States, but I'm always happy to come to Brazil when I have the opportunity to talk about what is happening in the financial industry. It's much better when I have the opportunity to speak Portuguese. When we talk about financial assets, I think I'll talk about the last 10 years of digital assets. Well, this is not something new in terms of technology.
Qualquer coisa que tenha valor, que tenha uma representação digital.
It is anything that has a value or some kind of representation. When I started talking about listening about this theme, I read a book about the revolution of blockchain. At that time, all financial events used to discuss this topic.
O que ela ia trazer?
Blockchain revolution. Everybody would talk about this. Many startups and fintechs were created based on blockchain 10 years ago.
Como é que é?
And when we look back,
O hyper...
when we analyze a Gartner hypercycle, you know, there's always a moment of high expectations. 2016, that's when we had a lot of expectation. When you open the book, the first page says the technology likely to have the greatest impact on the world economy has arrived, and it's not self-driving car or any other technology. It's called blockchain. I will talk about the implementations, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Quando a gente fala especialmente no segmento financeiro,
When we talk about the financial industry specifically,
o que eu entendo sobre
what I understand of innovation, and I'll be talking a lot about blockchain here, innovation doesn't happen when you develop the technology, but when you implement it to solve a real problem, when you change the way you do things.
interessante é que quando você vai no segmento financeiro,
So in the financial industry,
papel. Não importa qual
well, this industry has one role. It has to allocate risk and capital. The success of a bank or an insurer is on how they allocate risk
quando a gente fala sobre alocação de risco de capital,
and capital. And when we talk about this, there is a component in there, contracts. Contracts with whom?
o contrato
With those who are investing or save, or the insured company, insurer or insured company. It defines any promises or performance. Promise is something that will happen in the future. It relates to something that will happen in the future. I'm paying you now for something that
por exemplo,
will happen in the future, or I'm paying you for something that is happening now. If I contract an insurance, for example, I'm paying it in case something happens with my house or my car.
desempenho agora,
In treasury, for example, treasury bonds, I invest money now to receive money in the future. This is part of the contract. When we talk about blockchain, one of the way it revolutionized use cases is that we can have smart contracts, for example. So how does this change? This is not a new concept. If you look at a vending machine, for example, there is a kind of a smart contract there, but everything happens in the present. What are the conditions, the terms of this contract? I can choose
que eu vou pagar por
the product I want, how much I will pay for that, and these are the expressed terms of this contract. The value is received on that time, and there's always the implicit terms also. This food that I'm having is safe for my health.
Brasil, né? Reais.
It is being charged in Brazilian reais because we're in Brazil. These are all the terms that are included in the contract. And one of the things we imagine when we sign a contract like this is that a contract is between two entities, A and B.
Simplesmente, essa é a grande ideia do smart
This is the idea of a smart contract. There is a condition, this condition will be executed
executado baseado nas condições
based
executado.
on the terms of the contract that is being entered into.
Começa a entender por que algumas implementações foram excelentes em
And that's how we can understand why some blockchain implementations were successful and some of them were not. Every time you enter into a contract, there is someone in the room, even if it's a smart contract. Well, 10 years ago, I heard people say that a smart contract saying that a smart contract was a program being executed, that it didn't need to have any external agent or assessor.
distributed finance.
This is what we call DeFi, distributed finance. You don't need anyone else to do this.
O intermediador
The code is the intermediary.
faz contrato desse,
But when you enter into a contract like this, regardless of how it is executed, there, the state is always in the room. The state cares about the type of contract, the effects of the contract. Let's say that we have a smart contract that poses some risk to a company. The state won't let this contract to be executed because there's the bankruptcy law.
para alguém fazer algo ilegal,
If I come up with a contract for somebody to do something illegal,
no sistema jurídico,
the country's judicial law won't let it be executed. So the terms are very important.
monetárias,
And when we talk about commercial contracts, the state is also very interested in it because of the taxes.
saber que implementações de
And this is how we see blockchain implementations are divided. They have different appeals in different markets. Let me give you an example.
como um contrato de
A code
ter mecanismo
as a smart contract or some technological mechanism that ensures that rights or laws are implemented
funciona em código. Quem se lembra aqui do NAP?
works in codes. Do you remember Napster?
Aí sabendo do NAP.
Many people will know how old I am now that I mentioned Napster. Well, many years ago, you bought CDs to listen to music. We didn't have Spotify, and we had the copyright,
Backup das suas músicas.
um,
Surgiu o MP3.
and you were able to back up the song. So we created MP3.
Ele se aproveita
But Napster took advantage of this and did it peer to peer, meaning that users could share their music among them. They didn't sell the songs, but they facilitated this process, and this went against the copyright law.
gravador indo atrás de cada usuário.
But imagine a recorder going after everyone who did this. Well, the law was it was very difficult to implement the law.
A treta.
There's a lot of
Que aí esse
friction
grande
in the legal system. But then Napster
Napster não existe mais.
allowed recorders to find these people, and of course, Napster doesn't exist anymore. And then they created some digital assets in this sense.
Tecnologia garantia assim. Eu dificulto bastante
We can make users' life difficult if they want to make a copy of music or videos.
direito autoral. Garantia, gente, quando a gente comprava,
And the copyright law at the time of CD or DVD,
por exemplo,
they provided something to us that is not viable anymore.
no Xbox, se você
In PlayStation, or
você tem o direito
if you want to make a copy of your PlayStation, for example, you can't anymore.
dos 70 anos, né?
There's not a 70-year protection anymore.
Razoabilidade, mas a tecnologia resolveu.
But technology solved a problem
Quem quiser saber mais, tem um livro
that was common at that time. There is a book that says Lion's Lesson. It talks about code, and it shows how this works in different legal systems, negotiation in between countries. It shows how technology works on this, because in digital applications, that's what happened. If the code executes, I do not uh, depend on both parts. I've eliminated the risk, some type of risk. Remember, I said in the beginning, how does the financial system work in allocating risk and capital? And when we see the first implementations, the first tests, I remember Tolstoy now. Every family that is happy look alike, but every family that is unhappy is different. There are many advantages, but if you have one disadvantage, you will not be able to implement something. In 2016, 2017, I worked with the Japan Stock Exchange. It was the first evaluation of blockchain used in stock exchange. Of course, there are many advantages and disadvantages. What are the aspects of a stock exchange when you use blockchain for it? There is a non-deterministic aspect. There's also an issue of privacy, and privacy is very important in this market. If you want to learn more about this, well, I'll be recommending many books for you today, but Flash Boys, this book here, Flash Boys, shows how if you see someone is quoting a share, you can go ahead and do it and close a deal first. Scalability was also another aspect. Não pode deixar. Well, blockchain is great. It's highly available. It's distributed. You don't need to have that super infrastructure. There's also immutability. Once you did a transaction, it is there. You cannot change it. And this changes the stock exchanges as well, because nowadays you open an account and you can make transactions all day long up to the limit of your credit, and you come up with a balance. That's how you create products. Derivatives is a good example of that. So we would have to change the rules of many financial products. Tolerance to disaster. Imagine each cost reduction as well, because the cost is distributed in the network. It's not centralized anymore, and a risk is eliminated. When you eliminate a risk, well, why do you need a stock exchange? Because there's regulation. The state, once again, is in the room. So it creates disintermediation. So that's why 10 years ago, blockchain said, people would say that blockchain would replace the stock exchange, and it never happened. It's not about eliminating risk, it's about allocating risk and pricing it well. And to price it well, this book is really good. It tells the story of how insurance companies were created. We had some merchants in Europe that would send ships all over the world, and sometimes they didn't receive their ships back because of some type of accident. But merchants believed they had to do with a divine action. It was about good luck or bad luck. But people looked at the conditions, at the ship, at the people, and they started to understand that there were some patterns. And that's how the first insurance companies were created. They were companies that were able to classify the risks. But when you give a price to the risk, well, there's an element there. And that's why I say the implementation is different depending on the market. When you allocate a risk, you allocate the risk of the contract being executed and you having to turn to the legal system. When the friction is low, it works well. But when it's not worth it, costs are too high, or friction is too high, you can you have this kind of aspects in international contracts, or maybe in countries where you don't have legal certainty. That's when this type of technology is implemented. That's why we see very successful blockchain implementations in less developed countries because of this judicial gap, legal gap that we have. This was an interesting example. At that time, I was talking to a U.S. company CTO. They were about to implement insurance for flight delays. Why didn't you offer this kind of insurance at that time? Because the premium was too low, let's say $200 just to cover any expenses you would have in case of delay. So for 4 hours, you would have to call them and say, hey, my flight got delayed. I'll have to do this and that. There's a lot of friction. There's a cost to do this underwriting. So it was not worth it. And back then, the CTO was very excited to launch this product because it was a no-touch product. It was on blockchain. It was a DApp product. The client can get on their app, sign the contract, and if this contract receives information that the flight got delayed, this contract will be executed, and then they'll be able to use this money.
So you can check if this app, with the app, that if he's really at the airport. So he got to the airport, you can check that the person's there, and you can do several things with this app. And the problem is that discussion comes to the point where, okay, so am I doing all of this? So why do I need to be on blockchain? Because in fact, I can execute this contract with the rules in the database. It doesn't have to be blockchain. And this was one of the great discussions. So blockchain, is that just a technology? And then in the implementations happened afterwards. There were contracts with blockchain. But obviously, when you don't have the trust of your user, you have this third party. Okay, so it wasn't the case of insurance companies. They already have this for the users. And of course, there's the value of obscurity. When we begin to understand a little bit about the financial market, the money always flows in terms of asymmetrical risk analysis. So when you have one risk, which is asymmetrical to another one, let me give you an example. So why do I insure my house and my car? Because it's a great risk, but for an insurance company that combines everybody's risk, it is much easier for its capital to allocate this risk. And there's a factor. And if you get a contract and an insurance policy and you put techniques that, it's a smart contract, all those that you see in the tree, it's always a condition. And if that condition happens, I can pay you this. And if you have a cause or a third party involved, there's a series of things. And if you have a contract, you have to define all of these clauses in the contract, in the smart context, because it's a program. It has to execute all of the options. There's no option of not finding a condition. If there is a condition that is not foreseen in this contract, they have to look for somebody who's in the authority team. So, and usually this legal friction is monitored, is monetized actually. So there's 0.2% of probability of something happening, for example. It's not in the contract. So this is a legal process, because imagine that you have to negotiate all of these situations in a smart contract. So you're not going to be able to negotiate, right? It's extremely tiring. So that's why you have these clauses that are not well defined. And I myself had to try it out. And this was my car.
Tava andando numa rua.
And I was in a street that couldn't take any trucks. I didn't know about that, and that was the truck. Yeah, these are actual photos. And it was a very closed curve, 180 degrees. I was internal, and these are the trucks who carry those logs of wood, huge logs of wood. And so it got in and took the whole side of the car. And then I called insurance, and of course, when I called insurance, the insurance company said, okay, so actually the guilty party was the truck driver, and he said that you were racing and you hit him. And I said, what? And there was nobody to prove it. So then I said, okay, I'm going to have to use my insurance, and that's it. So I said this to a friend of mine who's a lawyer, and he said, no, this is a cause that you can win, a case that you can win, because you can't have trucks on this street. It's in all of the entrances of the street. It couldn't be there. So that if you want to bring the case to me, of course, you're going to have to fix your car with your own money and pay the lawyer, and then in 2 years' time, you're going to win the cause, maybe. But I went to see the contract. And then, my insurance company got 3 times the amount from the other insurance company, 3 times the premium. But he knew how to allocate risk. I didn't know how to do it. I couldn't fix the car, pay the lawyer, wait for 2 years to see if I was going to get the money at some point. The insurance company can do that. I looked at the contract. And that's how it usually works.
Outro exemplo.
And another example, it's interesting because it's more recent. It's about the use of tokenization, right? So digital assets. I know that's very fashionable. Brazil, you talk a lot about that. So let's talk about retail and CBDC. So central bank digital currency. So we can see that several internal banks, they have tokenization of deposits, but tokenization of many things because it's more efficient internally to work with that, having a twin, the tokenized representation of any asset you're working with. So if you're talking about real estate or debits or liabilities, whatever you're working with, it's much easier to work with that. And obviously, when we start thinking about the possibilities of digital money, tokenized money, there are huge possibilities because if you think about it, physical money that we carry in our wallets, it doesn't have any digital use. And today, when you do digital commerce, what are you doing? You're establishing a payment channel. But CBDC is not payment. It is the storage of values. And I can program it. So I can open up a window of possibilities. However, in all the conversations we have, we start checking it out with central banks, and over the last 2 or 3 years, this is one of the most talked about topics in terms of world finances. And we're going to talk a little bit about this, because the CBDC, it has 2 modalities, wholesale and retail. Wholesale is the one that you have the transactions of money between the central bank and the other banks. And you can imagine that the system it's SBB that goes between the central bank, does the settlement with the bank so that the ledgers they have are balanced. There isn't a lot of discussion about the advantage of having a blockchain, for example, for this kind of transaction. So it's distributed, high availability. There's definitely no discussion about that. And many people say, oh, it's just a new technology. Let's put it in as a backup, because most of the central banks today, they already have a system doing this. And many times it's a messaging system. Many of them are moving over to Windows 22, but technology is applied very well. Now, what are the problems with CBDC? And this is the feedback that I have from several places, from several other banks. It's the issue of privacy, especially in payments that have a lower value. So imagine the following. If I go to the bakery and I pay, there's nothing associating that money to me. That money, it does not leave any traces unless somebody writes it down. So this came from Bruno paid, but normally you don't have to identify yourself to pay with money, and there's a good value in that. one way or another in the economy. So what happens is the following. When you have a transaction, a CBDC transaction, how can you not leave the traces in the payment? So there are several discussions and technologies about this. We have seen implementations around the world. This is still the point. How can I do this in a scaled up basis for micropayments? It's still a problem to be solved. How can you guarantee your privacy? And in a moment of crisis, and let's talk about the crisis in two aspects. So money still has value. And for example, if you see Katrina, the hurricane, when it got to New Orleans, there was no infrastructure. Everything was flooded. There was no ATM, there were no ATMs, no internet, no electricity, and that was for weeks. So people used money. And I live in an area of the United States that has earthquakes. And the first thing that happened, I went to that class, how can you prepare yourself for earthquakes? And the first thing they say is have money, cash at home. Because if there's an earthquake and there's no infrastructure, that's what you're going to use. We assume that technology is always available, right? Until you lose your internet signal. And that's usually what happens. So it's, money in cash. And another sign of the crisis is the crises that are not necessarily natural. Let me give you an example. So this is the curve showing how much value in dollars is issued by the United States every year. So who uses money today in cash? Nobody. Nobody does it. Right? Or you use it a lot less than you used to, right, years ago. And I practically don't have any money in my wallet. So how can the quantity of bills issued have increased and not been reduced? In this case, it's dollars we're talking about, because dollars are used in distressed economies as well. So if you look at Ecuador, it's already dollarized. If you buy, for example, real estate in Argentina, probably it's better to pay in dollars. Many people, they store values in dollars. Around the world, it is the currency that is used. When we talk about the crisis, this is not going to stop existing, this currency. And it's also a way of avoiding censorship and the control of the state. We know the states that have this kind of control. So that's why the monetary value is not there. And that's why when we talk about technology, which is not relevant, and the future is probably going to be hybrid. It's just like when I said, the books are going to disappear. No, they are still there. And I think the same thing is going to happen with money. And there's something interesting when we talk about trust and privacy, which is extremely important for digital assets. And just making a quick comment for those who have already seen this film. Basically, it's the story of a guy who made a processor that could foresee the market. But when they interviewed the head of the University of Sydney in the economy area, well, in the past, it was not possible for you to foresee this accurately. If, the weather forecast said it was going to rain, you could be sure that it was going to be sunny. And if they said it was sunny, it was probably going to rain, so you had to take your umbrella. And today, we can foresee the weather in minutes in different regions, when it's going to stop raining. And why do you think this is not going to happen in the financial market? It's very clear, because time is according to the laws of physics. We were not able to calculate all the variables of physics at the same time with the speed that we needed it to be. But in the financial market, it's different. If, according to the time, let's say it's going to go down, it's going to go down, or it's going to rain, it doesn't rain if it doesn't have to rain. But in the market, we know. So remember the memes, right? The stock memes. So it's going to break, it's going to break, it's going to go up, it's going to go up, and the market reacts. So there's more trust. And a few years ago, I went to several meetings about CBDC around the world, and one of the main topics was two challenges. So practical associations, to practical uses, and the people need to trust it, because if you don't trust it, it's not going to work out, probably. Because privacy is extremely important, especially for democratic systems, the human factor and trust.
Terminando aqui,
Okay, so coming to the end, I'm going to bring this figure about Aknon, Indiana, to show how our market works. It's not different. So Aknon was a hunter, and he went into Glade, where Diana was bathing, violated her privacy. Diana was a goddess. So what happened was that Diana used her own Acton's own guns and weapons, let's say not guns, and to kill him. So in technology, with technology, its implementation, it always has to consider the end user, how it's going to be implemented to solve a real problem, and not technology for itself. Thank you.